Hello and welcome. I'm Eric Miscoll with EMS Now, and with me is my colleague Dita Weiss with in4ma. As many of you hopefully know, we recently completed our second annual tour of EMS companies in Europe. Dita and I spent an inordinate amount of time together driving around. There it is. Thank you, Dita. We were on tour for visiting 15 EMS companies, attending Electronica, and spending 4,500 kilometers in a car next to Dita was an experience. But one of the many issues we kept discussing had to do with the potential for the EMS market. And I can tell you, we didn't come to any absolute conclusion on that. So spoiler alert for you. But I thought what we would do is have that conversation here and share our thoughts with you, the audience, and invite any input or feedback relative to the topic. So let me introduce the topic, and then we can dive into various elements of it. The topic is how big is the total available market for the EMS industry, for electronics manufacturing? Dita, I think, as you know, is the best market researcher for EMS on the planet currently. In a previous life, many years ago, when I still had hair, I used to be a market researcher myself and would do sizing reports and forecasts for the EMS industry. Back then, we sized the potential market ourselves as well. But it seems like those numbers are not as readily available in the market anymore as they were years ago. We used to define the total available market for EMS as the cost of goods sold for electronic hardware OEMs. It wasn't perfect, but it worked for us, and I thought it gave a good sizing, and we were always consistent with that. So we saw total available market as the cost. If electronic hardware OEMs were to outsource all of their electronics manufacturing and it went to the EMS, that would be the total available market. And then you have what's called the served available market, which is an expression that captures how much have the EMS industry already captured of that total available market. So I'll get out of those kind of definition issues, but I think it's important to kind of at least paint the picture of what our discussion will include. Nobody seems to know what the total available market for the EMS industry is, and there's various sizing elements. But Dita and I, as we drove around, we had this discussion, which leads into, and we're going to have this conversation here, what are the benefits of outsourcing? What are the inhibitors of outsourcing that OEMs experience? And then talk a little bit at the end about what we see as coming in the future within the industry. Dita, let's start within Europe, because that's where you are the market research expert. The conversation and the slide that you have behind you, one of your current ones, addresses this as far as the total available market and how much of that has been captured by the EMS within Europe. Make some comments and speak to that, please.
Yeah, well, first of all, it is not my calculation, but calculation of a French market research company called Decision, who defined the total available market was 130 billion euros. And as far as I can remember, it was 2020 numbers. But again, there is not much deviation if we look at the total accuracy of those numbers. It's just to have a number you can talk about. Yeah? Of this, we are relatively certain among the people that work on market statistics in Europe, and there is several people working on it, including different associations. Well, number one, IPC, over here in Europe as well, and I'm working with IPC, but we as well have some experts on the German ZVEI who are working on those numbers, and so we think that the total market that is being manufactured in Europe is 105 billion, which means about 25 billion is imports. And as you can imagine, that is imports in the majority coming from the Far East. Now then, if we look at the share of this by the EMS and ODMs, so far we thought in rough calculations that we were talking about 38% in Europe. And as usual, we always are having some positive surprises when we visit companies, and we had some good experience already last year when EMS Now and in4ma toured the European markets. And this year, again, we got to very interesting conclusions, which is changing the full picture, but tells us as well that we still are to get to know this market much more in order to fully understand it. And the point was Sweden. In Sweden, we learned that about 70% of all electronic products are already manufactured by EMS companies and only 30 by OEMs. And they had a very logical explanation for it. And it was, number one, that in Scandinavia, you have a lot of very big, or you still have a lot of very big OEMs. And they used to manufacture their electronics products themselves. But when the SMT technology came up in the 90s, a lot of these companies decided not to invest in new machinery, but instead decide that it was better to transfer this production step to EMS companies. And so they transferred the PCBA in the 90s to the EMS companies. And since then, that has further developed and the vertical integration has increased. And it is unbelievable that today we know that the majority in Sweden of the EMS companies are not just manufacturing PCBA, but they are manufacturing full systems. And a lot of these systems are being shipped directly to the end customer with the appropriate list from the EMS customers. So, and that, I can assure you, is definitely different from what we know and see in other countries.
Yeah. No, and thank you for that. Because I remember that number when we were in Sweden. We were both, I thought, a little surprised at how high that was, but yet the rationale as you present made complete sense. Then we looked at, and then our ongoing discussion, and for the benefit of the audience, what Dita and I did is, based on those conversations, everywhere we went, whoever we spoke to, we asked for their impression, right? We figured in lieu of an official report that's done a good job sizing the potential market, let's at least ask the EMS companies who are engaged in this business every day with these OEMs, their impression of how much they think is being outsourced. And we heard some people couldn't size the country, but could say, listen, for the customers that we serve, our OEMs, it's a certain percentage or this much or that much. So, so this was more of an anecdotal inquiry on our part. But as we went through this detail, you had your overall numbers for Europe that you started to adjust. And I thought you kind of landed somewhere around 42%, you think, for Europe as a whole.
Well, as I said, before our trip, we were talking about 38%. Then we did some further analysis and tried to define, at least for the biggest European countries, the share, because again, there is a difference between Eastern and Western Europe. And when we finished those calculations, we were surprised to realize that we are now talking in Europe about a share of 41% for the EMS industry, which is already an advantage, but compared to other countries is still relatively low.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
if
think,
we look
and
behind you at the United States,
yeah,
uh, we think that's about 45% over there.
yeah. Yeah, and listen, I should probably explain what's behind me is not anything relative to the EMS industry. This is IMF projections of the world economy for 2022 and how big the economies would be. These are maps that I get from this site, Visual Capitalist. They have a good way of capturing data and maps. And I thought this one was appropriate for our conversation today. By the way, you made a point there too that I think is worth highlighting, which is EMS, ODM. When we're talking about it, we're using them kind of synonymously here for the point of our discussion. It's really a matter of outsourcing. Whether you're
Yes.
outsourcing on an EMS or an ODM basis, the fact is you're not building it in-house anymore.
Yeah.
You're using an outside resource. So our rough estimate is we think also that in Asia, this is just, again, our impression based on our experience, that the outsourcing is probably higher as well, that there's more of an adoption of outsourcing over there, as a lot, especially the ODM industry really came about out of Taiwan decades ago. And a lot
Yeah.
of these companies had both an OEM and EMS and an ODM
It
side to the
is.
business.
It is just if you look at the Far Eastern share of all EMS revenues, we know that it's more than 80% of revenues are being manufactured in Far East. And just look at Honhai, or better known as Foxconn, who are doing a lot of those revenues. And even so, we know it's not all electronic products, yeah, but we have no way of further cutting it down.
Yeah. So let's transition so that, I mean, we could talk about numbers all day, but let's transition more into a discussion of the benefits of outsourcing. So why do OEMs choose to outsource their manufacturing? We had this conversation in the car. I think of it in terms of kind of three general silos. I think of it in terms of cost. I think it in terms of capabilities. And then I also think it in terms of convenience, right? There's cost benefits that an OEM can do. It's the old fixed versus variable cost, right? Shift a fixed cost to a variable cost by outsourcing. Capabilities, you're able to kind of leverage the capabilities or greater capabilities of an EMS company and their engineering talent that is working on various electronic products of various different industry sectors. So their experience level is better, and their investment in equipment is also kind of cutting edge. And then I think in terms of convenience, which is really a matter your ability to ramp up and ramp down and really be kind of nimble in the industry in bringing things and reacting to market pieces. How do you see it?
Yeah, first of all, there are many issues over here. And if we start, for example, with the engineering part in the beginning, now in the EMS companies, not all EMS companies do have full engineering capabilities. Yeah? We always have to see it's a matter of size.
Mhm.
And just to throw in a number, we are talking about 2,200 companies in Europe doing EMS in Europe. But if we look at it from revenue size and we say, let's now leave all companies out who are doing less than 15 million in revenues. Because if I'm a big OEM and I want to outsource, I want to make sure that the revenues I outsource are somehow in line with the size of the EMS companies. For sure, I do not want to load my supplier with more than 20% of his revenues. Yeah. So if I leave that out, all of a sudden the picture becomes much smaller. It's only 305 companies in Europe who do more than 15 million in EMS. So that is the one thing. And if we talk about vertical integration, you can imagine that smaller companies do not have these capabilities. Yeah. If we talk about bigger electronic systems where you have to have not just the engineering, you have to have metal sheet fabrication, you have maybe plastic injection molding, you have to have full box building capabilities. And what we see as well is that there is more the desire from the customer to as well outsource the after sales service. And that is a totally different issue, because it is not just repair, but it is refurbish and reuse and all these different issues which are coming up now as well in regards to environmental protection acts. Yeah. We know, for example, that the marketing guys on the mobile phones, they would love us to throw away our mobile phones every 2 years and buy a new one. That's nice, but that is definitely not good for the environment. So we have to think about new ways how to do that. And then you need a partner who has a size to do all of that. Yeah. And here it comes that OEMs who are looking for a partner will look at the right partner in regards to size. That is number one. Number two is the benefit is as well the fact that the engineering teams within an EMS companies, EMS companies are normally, very few are specialized, for example, that they just focus on medical electronics, or that they are just focusing on air and space. The majority of the companies have a very broad, but still dedicated market segment definition, what they want to serve. And the engineers in those companies have the challenge of looking into all different kind of products and try to optimize them. Now, if in comparison to that, you look at an OEM, the OEM has just this one product, this one market, and he focuses on that. He might be very specialized, but he's not looking over the fence. And that is a huge difference. In other market segments, there might be other solutions for certain problems, or for example, in regards to further miniaturize products, or making them faster, or assembling them better. Do you remember this one example where we were in France and the EMS company told us that they pulled back a toy which had been manufactured in China in the past, and this French company re-engineered the product, and on the assembly side they were able to switch from 20 screws to assemble the toy to 4 screws, which makes it as well less expensive. So this is just a few of the examples where the advantage lies on the engineering side. Then in the production, you have the better capacity utilization. That is for sure. And we all know that EMS companies have very, very lean management structures. And I can give you many examples where this is the case. I attended the Capital Markets Day of INCAP this year, and the CEO over there, Otto Puck, presented his management team. It's a very lean structure, and he's not the only one. Many EMS companies have such a lean structure, and OEMs normally have at least 1 or 2 more management levels in between. All of that costs money.
No.
So that is the advantage of an EMS on the cost side.
You raise a couple of points I'd like to just kind of dive into, or pick apart a bit. One is, and where you started, I think was right. The right sizing of the relationship, right? Make sure if you're doing $5 million in electronics manufacturing, you don't belong at Hanhai, Foxconn, or any of the big
Yes.
ones, right? You need to find some. When I used to be a consultant, the number we roughly used was we would advise OEMs who are looking to outsource that they should be somewhere between 10 and 20% of their EMS's revenue. That way
Yes.
they are significant enough and they can command attention. You don't want to be a single digit or lower part of your EMS's business, because that's just the nature of business. Is you want to be able to have somebody serving you that is for whom you are an important customer. So
Yeah.
I think that's right. And there are so many small OEMs still. We all think of the big sexy labels and brands, but the reality is, and where you're sitting in Germany with the Mittelstand, right? The small medium, that's always been a historic strength of the German economy, is that size of firms who do some very excellent work,
Yeah.
but they're not huge, Siemens type level.
Mhm.
And so I think that's a very, very important consideration. And I liked your point about the management levels at EMS versus OEMs. I used to be a consultant and worked with a group, and one of the elements we did for total outsourcing, we called it the OEM internal spend, right? And I
Yes.
can tell you from experience that most OEMs really underestimated the costs they incurred to manage their outsourcing. I can tell you stories of who maintained the management levels to within the OEM that manage the same functions, but now they're outside. Well, that didn't really, they didn't garner the benefit, the financial savings that they should have. Why do you need two supply chain managers? Why do you need two, logistics whatever it is, production managers?
See, the point on that is, Eric, I think in actual fact, and that might be a reason why the number is higher in the United States, is that the top management normally gets a bonus which is dependent upon the profits. So if you are able to increase your profits by outsourcing, you probably want to push that much harder than if your bonus is to a lesser degree dependent on that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, for sure, you mentioned middle management. Yeah. First of all, they are scared. Am I going to lose my job? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
answer is yes, might be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You might be, yeah.
That might be. But on the other hand, let's be realistic. If such transfers happen, and the last big one was in Bulgaria last year when Sanmina took over the full factory of Osram, lightning
Remember.
company, and so this business from an OEM became an EMS business now. Yeah, and Sanmina took all the staff. They took everybody over. I don't know whether they later on streamlined this a little bit. I don't know. Yeah, but I'm pretty much sure that this factory in the past had to carry overheads from the headquarters as well.
Yeah. No, good point. You're right. I remember that situation. Listen, the other thing, and I'm just thinking about another benefit to outsourcing, has to do with older support of older technologies. And we saw several examples of that, right? That these OEMs who build, I mean, we saw incidences in the railroad and also nuclear where, the products are in the market for 50 years already, right?
Yeah, and they're still tin lead.
Something has to be done. And there had to be, I think we saw one where there was a test fixture, if I remember this right, that was originally built in 1964 or 1968. And the test fixture is being held by the EMS and had last been used 2 years ago, right? So they have to maintain this. And that's an ongoing support mechanism for this particular OEM. And that OEM has found it probably more cost efficient and better on a longer term to be able to partner with an EMS who can help continual support with them in that way.
Well, in actual fact, you could as well see that as a part of the after sales service, because what is being discussed at the moment is as well that some of the components are no longer available, and if you have to repair a board, then you might have to take other similar old boards and desolder those
Mhm.
components out of the spare boards and put them into the boards to be repaired.
Yeah. And and that's an excellent point. And I was going to mention it before. One of the benefits, I think, is you're talking about the EMS has seen more type of products. They're also more experienced with different types of componentry, right? So an OEM builds theirs and they specify their components for a particular build, and they tend to stay with that, even though they have, variables, alternative parts that they can specify. But an EMS has such a broader experience within the component supply base and experience with different ones. So the example you're using, if they have to go back with older components, they may say, hey, listen, do you know about this particular one here? We built products that uses this. It seems similar. It's worth looking into. So again, you're tapping into that broader experience base that the EMS have in that particular regard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I wanted to move it forward in the interest of time here too. Let's talk about why people don't outsource. Let's talk about kind of the inhibitors of outsourcing. Why would OEMs choose not to outsource? And this was one that I will just tell the audience, Dita and I argued all over Europe as we drove about this very point. While I would characterize us both as advocates for the EMS industry, and are big proponents of it, Dita is probably stronger in that way than I am, where I was always striking a note of caution in some particular situations. So I'll let you go first, sir.
Yeah, I have to say, first of all, this was a verbal fight. Yeah, because I was driving all the time and I needed to have my hands on the steering wheel, so we couldn't end this outside the car. Now, it probably is a matter of different cultures. And, in Europe, we do not have the United States of Europe. We have 42 countries with many different cultures. And so I cannot speak for all these cultures.
But you do call it a union, so.
Yeah. But for example, in Germany, we have a lot of family-owned businesses. And these family-owned business see it as their social responsibility to keep all the manufacturing to themselves and protect their employees, which is a nice thing. But on the other hand, if you're accepting that your own production is up to 10% higher before you even start thinking of moving some of that out, at the end of the day, you're not protecting your employees. In actual fact, in my opinion, you bring them in danger. Because you always, as a manager of the company, and even if you own the company, you have to look at the most cost-sensitive way to manufacture your product. Because if your competitor is smarter than you, you lose your markets, and then you risk your whole company. So it doesn't make sense, this argument. And again, we had another example about 2.5 years ago over here in Germany, where company Kartek took over the electronics manufacturing of a car key manufacturer. Hülsberg and Fürst is a company who were doing all the locks for the cars, and that was fine mechanics in the past. But then all of a sudden, all these locks became electronic products. It was just an electronic switch. And even so, you still were able to use a mechanical key to open up the car, which was then inside the electronic key. But the majority of the product was an electronic product. And this company had converted their production to the electronics to find out that they were not cost sensitive enough, and they were losing the market. And at the end, they talked with Kartek, and Kartek took over the electronics manufacturing. They took all the machinery. They took, I think, 150 employees, and they made the production manager as a new managing director. Yeah. they didn't take the overheads, yeah, because Katech had their own overheads, yeah.
Right.
But again, that is an example how, at the end of the day, that's made manufacturing um, less expensive and to an advantage of the OEM.
Yeah. And I think, and that's a good example because you speak to the issue of one of the inhibitors of outsourcing is this kind of tradition of manufacturing. You mentioned it in Germany. We heard the same thing in France, I believe, from the
Yes.
companies there, that they have that culture too of meaning wanting to, it's always been done. We've always done it this way kind of mentality. So we're going to keep doing this, and that social responsibility on that. The other thing I think of too, about the inhibitors is I mentioned before the older technology going out. Sometimes that newer cutting edge technology, OEMs might, if they have multiple products, be willing to let the older stuff transition out, where they're really focusing what engineering talent they have and their resources more on the newer stuff that they're developing. So there's kind of an age or a life cycle of products that plays into this as well.
Hmm.
Yeah. How do you see that?
Difficult.
I mean, I think that there is, if you think of,
to be honest, I wouldn't too much comment on that.
Okay. Well, and my point there is that I think that there's stuff that's maybe where there's IP sensitivity is higher and more regulated industries. There's a little more concern, but part of that has to do with being able to select the right EMS as well, who has the right competencies, the right certifications, and the right manufacturing history to provide what you need.
Oh yes, well, it is definitely a problem. As I mentioned, 2,200 company. Who is going to be the right partner for you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we knew about this problem, and that's why 2 years ago we developed EMS Scout, which is a helpful tool where you can just on the ems-scout.net can go into the internet, and you will find all the EMS companies in Europe listed in there. Yeah. We are at the moment persuading the companies to put in more information than just their name and addresses, because that is what the OEMs at the moment want us to get done, is that the companies can see what certifications do they have, what is a rough revenue size, and they can pre-select, and at the end they with the search criteria used and what they can do already at the moment, they can do an aerial search, for example, because that is proximity is getting more and more an issue. Companies, OEM companies, they want to have their supplier close by. They want to be able to jump in the car and drive maximum 2 hours to get to their supplier. So we have this tool whereby you can say, well, I'm located, for example, in Stockholm, and I want my supplier in a proximity of 150 kilometers. So you just type it in, and then the tool shows you all EMS in the proximity of 150 kilometers around Stockholm. And you can do that for any city. And we know that OEMs are using this tool already. So
yeah, hey, but to go back on point as far as what's inhibiting the outsourcing, rather than one of the issues we consistently heard in Europe too, is that some people are unaware, and that there was a sentiment within the EMS saying we need to do a better job of elevating our industry to the OEMs. Right. We need to do a better job of promoting ourselves and making OEMs aware of not just that we can do printed circuit board assembly, but that with the full scope of capabilities that we truly are able to bring to market for them.
I might be beaten up by some of the EMS if I now say that, in my opinion, the marketing of the EMS industry is not satisfactory. We need to do much more marketing. We need to make the industry aware that all capabilities are there in the market and normally at lower cost. So and that is something that is missing. And
You
you
know,
wouldn't believe that one of my partners, in actual fact, goes to OEMs and tries to persuade them to outsource some of their products. And he normally comes home and he has a lot of orders, which he then transfers to EMS companies. And some of these EMS companies don't even have their own sales. In the past, they have relied on the fact that their existing customers would continue to come.
yeah.
But
And this is
Corona now taught us that that is not necessarily the case, because some of the customers did not survive Corona, or at least lost a lot of their business. And now these companies are sitting there and they're waiting for orders and they don't come. So
yeah,
that is
yeah.
not,
And
it's
and I
not
will.
good enough.
This is one of the issues that you and I disagreed over, where am generally of the opinion that I think that electronic OEMs all have at some point in their history been made aware of the EMS industry. They know it. The issue is that they're judging it as insufficient or inappropriate for them at the current time. And I know that this changes with OEMs over time, but I think that EMS have been out there, spent a lot of money. You know, go on any job board for EMS. Everybody's hiring sales and marketing people, right?
Yeah.
At least I see that over here. I don't know how that is in Europe. I don't look at the job boards there. But so I think so the issue is really one of making the value proposition to match the OEM's needs, because the needs vary. Obviously, it's life. Life is complicated sometimes, and what they're doing and their rationales vary.
It's difficult to explain, but let me just give the example. I'm visiting about 40 to 50 companies, EMS companies, every year.
Mhm.
Yeah. And this year we did 15 companies together. And I think I speak for you as well when I say that we were really impressed with what we saw in these companies. And it was not that they all were having their same focus. Yeah, some had the focus on high automation, other had the focus on very high product complexity. Remember that one company where we saw that 32 layer board with chip on board technology and all of this? Unbelievable. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you don't find that normally in most of the OEM companies. So the capabilities of the EMS industry are much broader, and they can only tell the OEMs who are insecure, go and make an appointment. Have a look at some of these EMS companies. They always have their doors open for you to have a look at their manufacturing sites, and you will realize what advantages you have by working together with them and having them as a service partner.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point. I would say you just reminded me of kind of the last kind of inhibitor to outsourcing that I'd want to mention. We talked about this a lot in the United States. It's the aging of the management. In the United States, we call it the gray tsunami, right?
Yeah.
People, you look at the audience, older people. If I had hair, it'd probably be gray like
Yeah,
yours.
well, just
And
look at us too.
yeah, and I think that what we see, and the point there is that we see older kind of executive people who've had that tradition of manufacturing want to maintain it. When you bring in younger engineers and management at that, they're saying, "Oh no, we we can outsource this," right? So there is the transition that happens, and it's not a cultural thing so much. It's more of a generational kind of adoption to it, because God knows the EMS industry. There's whole industries like networking that grew without any of those OEMs. Most of them never had a history of internal manufacturing. They grew and adopted EMS from the outset and launched and saw the great benefit to it. So, listen, I do want to end, and we do need to end, as much as I enjoy speaking to you, on what we expect to see as far as outsourcing as we move forward. What's your general prognosis? What does your crystal ball say?
Well, I wouldn't want to give a number to it, but definitely what we're going to see is more outsourcing from the OEMs in the future, together, which we should not forget, together with more reshoring.
Mhm.
and with the fact that companies realize that they can have a manufacturer close by doing the product at the same cost or even less. Yeah, so you don't need to look at that from a cost side.
Yeah.
The other thing is you will have not just the PCBA anymore. Yeah, the OEMs will want to cut down on the size of their suppliers. They want to have the full system built by one company, and they want to only deal with that one company. And if possible, then even have this company do the aftermarket services for
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And as you said, that is gonna be the great tsunami which might happen.
Yeah. And I'm optimistic like you. I see more outsourcing happening. I do think that the industry has really proved itself, and it's been difficult a few years, but I think their capabilities are much stronger. I think for the points you taught, I think and we saw this in Europe, the electrification of everything, right? Everything, all these products that are becoming electrified, they need more, they need help doing that because oftentimes it's companies who, they're industrial companies. Electronics isn't a specialty for them. So leveraging the industry makes sense.
Yes.
The reshoring, I think you said, is absolutely right. We've seen estimates by UBS that up to 20-30% of what's currently being made in China is going to shift out of China. Well,
Yep.
where's it going? Well, it's coming back to North America, Europe, even in other parts of Southeast Asia. And I think also what you're talking about, adopting it more fully instead of just doing PCBA. I think one of the people we spoke to in Europe said, once you do a little, you tend to grow, right? Once we get in, we tend to be able to grow the business because you can prove your competencies. And then there's certainly just the big industry trends, product trends that are happening, IIoT and EVs and what have you, that I think are driving it. So
Yeah.
I think we're both very optimistic for the future of outsourcing. I think it's going to continue to grow. To the audience, I would say, please share your thoughts on any of all that we've talked about. If you think, Dita is full of beans, by all means, send me a note so I can tell them that. But no, but I mean, what are your thoughts on this? What are you seeing? How are you viewing it? We don't have the absolute answers. Our desire here today was just to engage in a conversation and share our thoughts with you. Dita, any closing thoughts from your side?
No, I can just tell the OEMs who are listening, talk to your EMS company and have a look at their manufacturing facilities.
Yep. No, there's excellent capability, world-class capabilities out there ready for you to leverage. So again, Dita, it's been a pleasure sitting with you. To our audience, thank you very much. Give us any feedback you wish to share. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.